everybody. Welcome back to the How to Podcast series. My guest has been on my Dad Space show, and now he's back again. We're both recovering from Father's Day weekend, here to talk podcasting today. And so if you want more about Jay, head over to Dad Space, check out the episode. Hear a lot of great stuff, really great stories for dads, and always great to reconnect with another fellow podcaster again. Jay, welcome back to the How to Podcast series this time.
Dave, thanks so much. I'm excited to be hanging out again.
Right? I'll just keep making more podcasts so I have more time to talk to you. This will be great.
I'm in.
Okay.
Whatever you want to talk about,
All
let's
right.
do it.
Okay. Tell us about your show. Jay, come on.
My show is called the Okie Bookcast, and that's O-K-I-E Bookcast for folks who might not know what an Okie is, haven't read The Grapes of Wrath, or don't live around here. And I talk to authors, I talk to booksellers, I talk to really anybody connected to the bookish life of Oklahoma, which is not the oxymoron that some might think it is. We really have a pretty cool literary world here in Oklahoma that's not known about. And so I get to amplify these authors. Some of them are first-time authors, some of them are independently published, and some of them are National Book Award winners and Penn Faulkner winners and people who have sold millions of copies of their books, which is just fun on both sides. I love talking to the ones who are just getting started because there's a lot of passion there. I love talking to the folks who are much further down the road because there's a lot of experience there and a lot of wisdom for authors and just a lot of fun stories and things to talk about with readers. And then the other thing that we do is once a month, my daughter, Hannah Heron, who is also an author, and I get together and bring a guest on, and we talk about just what we're reading. We do book reviews and recommendations, and that's a ton of fun because, one, I get to hang out with my daughter and talk with her, but also, you know, when you get to talk about things that you're passionate about, it's just the time flies, and it's fun every time. And in fact, we're recording tonight. So, you know, we get to talk about what we're reading, which is something that we are both incredibly nerdy about. We bring in other folks who are equally nerdy about it, people who are on Bookstagram or Book Talk, or we bring in other authors and just talk books. So if you are a bookish person as well as a podcast person, you need to go check it out, okiebookcast.com.
Wow, it sounds like you've done that before.
I have done it once or twice.
Sounds like you've done it. Yeah, and then the website, okiebookcast.com as well.
Yep.
A little bit for the website. Tell everybody what's here for people coming first time to the site.
Sure. You can find just about everything. So the most recent episode is always front and center. We have a couple of special pages. I failed to mention, we do a poetry anthology where I feature Oklahoma poets. They read their own work and I stitch it all together and then put it out. We put that out once a quarter. In July, we will be dropping our 3rd anniversary episode of that show. We've had over 50 poets, hundreds of poems, and we'll actually be having our biggest edition yet. I have 20 poets who have contributed work to Behind the Rains, what it's called. And that comes from the Oklahoma State song, Where the Wind Comes Right Behind the Rain. Sing along if you know it. You can find all the episodes of that. You can find all the episodes of Your Next Great Reader all in one place. I have bios for all of my guests that are on a blog there. And I also have some playlists if you're interested in a certain kind of author. So I have a playlist of just children's authors that I've talked to. I have a playlist of Native American authors that I've talked to. I have a playlist of nonfiction authors that I've talked to. Lots of different things. So there's all kinds of stuff there about the show, all different ways to listen. And it's a great place to go and just begin to investigate all things Okie Bookcast.
Okay. And you're really focused on your specific area of the world. You're not getting authors from everywhere. That's on purpose, right?
That is, it's very intentional.
Okay.
When we started, one of the big things that happened, my daughter was putting out her first novel during COVID, which was not a good time, by the way, to put out anything except podcasts. Podcasts blew up.
Yeah.
But novels, not so much. We were looking for shows like your Living the Next Chapter show for her to go on to just promote the book and realized there weren't very many.
Yeah.
And particularly weren't very many that highlighted authors either in a particular area or that were self-published, independently published, weren't, big 5 kinds of authors. And so I really wanted to amplify this incredible literary world that, quite honestly, when I started, I had no idea how robust it was. I did not think, when I first started, I thought I'm going to do 12 interviews a year and hopefully we can go 2 or 3 years and there's enough authors to talk to. And I am now 73 interviews in, and I've got a list of both people I really want to talk to and people who have invited me asked me,
Yeah.
here it is,
Yeah.
if they can come on the show. And so it just keeps going.
Do you do anything special around advertising to your community around this podcast, being as so focused?
I try to show up in every single place I can
Okay.
that is bookish in around the state. So the simple thing that I did, I created bookmarks that have a QR code that takes straight to the website. And I've gone to every independent bookstore in Oklahoma City and lots of them around the state as I'm in different places. And I always have a stack of them in my car. So when I'm in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and I drive past Bear's Bookshop, like, oh, there's a story I didn't know about, and walk in, talk to the owner for a little bit, hand off some bookmarks and do that. And then if anybody calls me and says, hey, will you come do this thing? If it's bookish related and I got time, I'm coming. So I have been the MC for an adult spelling bee. I have stood and done some interviews at a book event. I've spoken to all kinds of authors groups and just really anything I can do around the city, particularly around Oklahoma City where I am, but anywhere around the state that I can just spread the word. And for me, Dave, it's not just spreading the word about the podcast. It's also just spreading the word about these authors.
Right.
I think if I was just trying to shill for my own thing, I wouldn't be as passionate about it, but I know how great these conversations are and I know how great these authors are. And so it makes it really easy for me to walk in and say, hey, I would love for the folks who come to your store to also get to meet some of the authors who are in your store, because everybody has that local author bookshelf. And so we're working on some things with that. But yeah, really, it's just every place I can put myself that I can also put the show. I say yes.
Okay. I do have podcasters listening to the show who are author focused. You are also an author. So please plug your book so we can get you on other podcasts as well. Come on, Jay.
That's outstanding. And so thank you for that. I have two books. My first book we talked a lot about on the Dad Space show. It's called God Help Me, I'm a Young Dad. It is 10 essentials for becoming the dad your kids need. And it just talks about how we can build things like love and joy and gratitude into our lives so that then we can start the process of building those things into the lives of our children. And it's really designed for dads who have kids up to maybe, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old, because teenagers are a whole different animal. And while God still needs to help us with those, that's a different book. And then my second book that just came out this spring is called College Unpacked. I am a dean of a community college here in Oklahoma City. I've been working in higher ed for the last 20 years. I've sent all four of my kids to college. And I have just watched students through the years struggle with college, not because they're not smart, not because they don't know how to, not because they're not academically prepared, because they don't know how to navigate this kind of wildly convoluted system that higher education has become. So College Unpacked is designed to help students and their families navigate that system, figure out how to take the college journey, everything from deciding where to go to school all the way through college graduation, how to work with faculty, what to do on move-in day. And we talked about that one on your Living the Next Chapter podcast. So I feel like we've done lots of that, and I want to throw people back to your stuff as well. But yeah, so those are my two books. I'm working on some fiction stuff now that hopefully will be out by the end of the year. And you can find all that, as I'm just throwing websites.
Let's do it. Yeah.
At jhallwriter.com, and it's just JHALLWRITER.com. Both my books are there and stuff about appearances and upcoming projects, things like that.
See, we did it all. We're done. Thanks, Jay. That was great. It's great having you on the show.
Dave.
Now, okay. Yeah, I want to do up front because you have so much to offer.
I appreciate
and I want
that.
to cover it all often because there's a lot of people listening and they're like, oh my gosh, I need Jay on my show for this, and this, many reasons. So that's what I love when people do all these things. I want to celebrate it. When you first started your show for your author podcast, how hard was it to find your first 5 guests?
Not at all.
Okay.
Now, I will say I did a couple of things. One, I just went to social media and searched Oklahoma author, and here they all came.
Mm-hmm.
But I know a little bit about marketing. And one of the things I know about marketing is that you go to where the people are you want to reach. So I found a Facebook group of Oklahoma authors that had like 2,000 people on it and said, hey, I'm going to start this podcast. And if you're interested in coming on, hit me up. And was inundated, as you can imagine, because authors are wanting to get their stuff out. And it was great because it allowed me to be a little bit choosy about who the first conversations were with, and was able to find some folks who were pretty well connected in the author world in Oklahoma, had some really interesting stories to tell. So my very first guest was an author who had written the story of her mom's flight from Vietnam, as after the fall of Saigon, while Amy, the author, was 5 years old, and just that whole conversation about what it meant to be a refugee, what it means to be Vietnamese American, and this was during the height of COVID. So to be Asian American in Oklahoma during COVID was a complicated thing. And so we had a really, really fascinating conversation, not just about her books. And that's one of the goals, is to not just focus on the work, although the work is fascinating, but to tell the stories of these people, because I think that's even more interesting sometimes than the work that they're doing. And then it just started rolling from there. I have yet to have a month where I had to wonder who I was going to talk to.
Well, that's good. Yeah, like for my show, for Living the Next Chapter, as a non-author, I felt a little bit out of my element to try to find guests for my show, because like who would ever come talk to me? And one thing I did was there was an author I really enjoyed listening to. I listened to his audiobook. I had all of his copies of his books, and I listened to him on other shows. I heard him on one show, and mid answer to a question, he was giving the answer, the host took a phone call.
No way.
Yeah, and told him to hang on, and his phone rings, and you could hear one side of the conversation because he left it in the podcast about
Wow.
something about his gardener needed access to the cabin or the gate or something. Where's the keys? And he had this conversation, and then came back to the guest who's sitting here the whole time, like
Wow.
and he didn't even apologize. He just went to the next question and didn't even let him finish the first question he was answering. So when I reached out to him, I said, "Hey, I'm Dave. I host Living the Next Chapter. It's a new podcast." His first question was, "How many listeners do you have?" And I'm like, "Well, none, because it's new, right? You're like going to be my first or second guest." And he's like, "Well, I don't normally do new podcasts." So I said, "Well, that's fine. I appreciate that. That's really nice of you to even spend time with me today. I do have all your books. I really enjoy what you do. To have time with you, even to do this, is great. I just want to apologize for one thing before we go." And he looked at me because we just talked for like 5 minutes. I said, I brought up that example of him on that show. And I said, "If you do decide to come on my show in the future, I'd love to give you a better experience. I feel like that wasn't a good representation of podcasting."
That's well played. Yeah.
Right. And he looked at me and went, "I don't care about your audience size. When can we book an episode?"
That's outstanding.
Right.
And I think, Dave, that brings up this really, really important, because we do reach. I mean, there are authors who are asking me to come on because they want an audience. The authors who have won major awards and these kind of things, they're not looking for me. I have to go find them. And one of the, I think, key things in that is to develop, to the extent that it's possible to develop a relationship, a conversation. So for me, most of those authors, the first time they meet or hear from me is not the pitch email. We've connected on social media. I've said stuff about their books. I've tried to have some kind of interaction with them, not in a DM, like I'm going to wear them out kind of thing, but just normal passing interactions. And then when you do make that pitch, you have some point of connection like you had. Now, that wasn't a thing that you did, but it was a thing you could point to say, "I know this happened to you. I hate this happened to you. I can give you a better experience." And it's the same kind of deal. "Hey, we were talking on social media about this movie that you were really into. I'd love to have you on the show. Here's what I do. Here's who I am." Most of the time, unless they're just not talking about books right now, or they're not touring or whatever, I rarely get told no, even by people who are pretty significant names, because there is some kind of relationship there. And they also appreciate the chance to talk about Oklahoma, even if they haven't been here. I talked to an author not long ago who moved away when she was 12, hasn't come back, but she still feels like this is home. And so there was that point of connection. So I think for those who are looking to find guests, to do interviews, find ways to connect with them that's more than just, "Hey, I have a show and I like your stuff," because that's probably not going to do it, especially if the name is big enough.
Yeah. One of the other things I want to do on this show is help podcasters with the kind of the mechanics that goes behind their show. For an interview-based podcast, can you kind of give us like a brief overview of your onboarding? Like you talked about how you find your guests. Like kind of how does somebody go from being an email to be sitting on camera with you? Can you kind of give us a breakdown of what you do?
It's pretty quick and easy. So you and lots of folks that I guest on their shows do kind of that pre-interview conversation, make sure it's a fit. And it also, I think, gives you a chance to see what the technology setup's going to be like and what challenges you might have. I don't do that for a couple of reasons. One, my time, I just don't have enough of it. And two, authors tend to not have a lot of that extra time as well. So I try to be very careful about the time I'm asking them for. That said, I do have an intake form and it's a basic, and really I send that to them and say, I want to know more about you so that we can have this conversation. And so I ask them, what questions you want to be sure we ask? Are there things you want to be sure we don't talk about? Or things you don't want to talk about on the show at all? Is there something specifically that you want to promote and be sure that we get to? I ask them just what name they prefer to be called, because I talk to authors who write under pseudonyms, and I don't know, do I call you JL? Do I call you James? How do you want to do that? And then there's just a real quick release form at the end of it that just is there to say, hey, I can use your stuff for as long as I'm around. Never had a problem with it. And then I also, in that email, send just some basic technical stuff. I tell them, so I record on a platform called Squadcast. It's just like Zoom where we're talking now, just the audio quality is a little bit different. It allows me to do some things with it afterwards. And so I give them kind of an introduction to that, and then encourage them, wear headphones. And if you have an external mic, use an external mic. And just some other kind of basic stuff about what to think about as you're coming on. I will tell you 70% of the time, those instructions are largely ignored. So one of the challenges coming on, figuring out how to make the sound work, getting the echo from their computer speakers that you're using. And so then they got to go find headphones. We got to get all that set up. So it's a little bit of a task on the front end, because authors just aren't generally very tech savvy people, especially in the audio work, because they haven't done it. But yeah, once those conversations are had, we get on, and sometimes it takes a few minutes. Occasionally it doesn't, but most of the time it does. And then it's just off and running. And one of the things I really try to do, and I think one of the things that the pre-show interview does, is help people get comfortable with you and you with them. So we take a couple of minutes before we start recording to just kind of walk through the show. Here's what we're going to talk about. We'll talk about anything that we happen to have in common, and then off we go. But the goal really is to let them feel a little bit comfortable getting used to being in front of a microphone, getting used to communicating this way. Although thankfully, one of the positives of COVID, if we could say it, is that we all got used to talking on Zoom. And so it's a little intimidating, I think, that it might have been, gosh, what is that now, 6 years ago, when it just wasn't as familiar a platform. I give them, here are the things we're going to talk about. I don't give specific questions because I'm not that organized, but I do give them, we're going to talk about why you became an author. We're going to talk about your latest work. We're probably going to talk about process a little bit. And then there's usually some hook or some kind of life thing that's interesting to me that I think would be interesting to my audience, that I say, hey, we're going to be sure and talk about, your mom leaving Vietnam with you when you were 5 years old, that kind of thing, just to kind of give them a moment to think about it. And then I end every show with 3 questions, and I always give them those up front, because the last question throws everybody off. And I can tell the ones who haven't thought about it, because they just stop dead for a minute, and then we have to pick up. And the last question I always ask is, if you could have a meal with one character from fiction, who would it be and what would you talk about? Which leads to some really, really fun conversations. I've talked about Scrooge McDuck. We talk about Gandalf a lot. I mean, there's some great answers to the questions. But if you're not ready for it, because I had somebody turn it on me on a podcast where they asked me that question, and I was like, oh, I've never thought about what my answer to the question would be, and stopped dead for a minute, and then got into it. So I make sure they have those last 3 so that that's familiar, and then give them enough that they can kind of come in with, here's an idea of what we're going to talk about.
Okay, so beyond your podcast being focused on your geographic location, is there anything else that's a special secret sauce to your show?
I don't know about secret sauce, except I will tell you this, and you may have discovered this, so I'll be interested to hear your experience. The less known the author is, more energy they have about making sure everybody knows they were on the show. And I've discovered now, not that, I mean, named authors are great, but what I have found is they will put it out one time. They kind of do their duty, and it's usually like a repost of what I put out there. So it's not original. It's just a retweet, whatever. And then that's kind of it, because they're moving on to the next 10 podcasts that they're going to be on, or the interviews that they're doing. But these independent authors, these first time authors, it will keep coming up and keep, like, once a week or once a month, it'll come back up that, hey, remember I was on this show and I was talking about my book, which is awesome. Again, it's great promotion for them, but it also helps me out because it keeps bringing those conversations back up. And while those authors don't always have the most to talk about, they do bring a ton of energy to the conversation. It just doesn't feel, I want to be careful because I don't know that I've run into this very many times. It doesn't feel as kind of set that these are the things I talk about when I talk about these things. I've been really fortunate that most of the kind of big name authors that I've talked to as a new book was coming out. And so they weren't tired of talking about it yet, which has, created a lot of fun energy around just them being excited about what's going on in the world.
Yeah. So for living the next chapter, and I'm exposing myself here, what I do on my show, because I know that the first few minutes of the podcast is where most of the analytics come from. So what I do on purpose is I lead my guests to talk to the authors that are listening to the show. The authors that are listening to the show may not be interested in the topic of the book from my guest. So it could be a cookbook. And I have an author who writes historical fiction. They're not interested in the cookbook. They're interested in how this author got here and what they've learned. So the first 5 minutes of the episode is focused on the authors, which is also inclusive of the readers who listen to the show.
Sure,
so I'm getting everybody at the beginning. And if the authors feel like there's nothing here for them after the author section portion of the podcast, they're free to go. But technically, I still got the analytics for the whole listen. Right. So I'm serving two audiences at the beginning of every episode, but I would say 90% of my audience, or 90% of my conversation, is focused on the readers who are going to be here, and they may never write a book. So they're not here for all the stuff about cover design and story arc and character development. They don't have any interest in that. They just want to buy your book. Just let me buy your book, Jay. Come on. So I want to get there. That's the people who are going to actually spend a lot of their money on support of the authors. So I want to spend the bulk of my time there. So that's kind of my secret sauce.
I think that's one of the things that I've seen in other author-focused podcasts. Some of them do get really caught up in the nuts and bolts of writing, and that's great. I love listening to those shows because I'm an author and I like the nuts and bolts of writing. I'm not going to go buy most of those books because I'm an author and don't have any money, but also that's just not necessarily the things that I'm interested in reading. So yeah, I think having that hook, finding a way to help lots of different kinds of people be interested, and then more and more, kind of honing in. That's one of the things when we do the Next Great Read shows, the book review shows, Hannah and I try really hard because we read kind of specific genres that we're really into, but we try really hard to branch out so that people aren't just coming on the show and going, oh, great, they're talking about science fiction and horror again. I'm not interested. So we try to get into, she'll read a romance novel or I'll read a literary fiction, something, just to have something else to talk about to bring in as wide an audience as possible.
Yeah. And the other part, too, of my secret sauce is the fact that I'm not an author like you are. So I don't know the process. So I get to ask some pretty simple, silly questions of my guest. Yeah. I'm like, I don't know what that means. What does that acronym mean? They're like, oh, everyone knows this. Well, no, I don't. And then as a representation of my audience, they may not know either. So I always kind of, when I do my pre-chat with my guests, I'm like, think of your journey as a marathon. You've crossed the finish line as an author. Yay for you. I have listeners who just bought a pair of shoes. They don't know what's ahead of them. So what can you do to encourage them? And then I get out of the way. I move in the audience. Because again, at this point, I'm not an author. So technically, this part of the conversation is not directed towards me. It's really directed towards the listener who is an author. Right. And I just excuse myself and go sit with everybody else. And it's kind of nice. I tell them, I'm giving you my podcast in this moment. It's your show now. I'll see you. I'll be over there when you need me, and I move off to the side. So that's
and I think you get really fun conversations out of that because authors like to talk about craft. They like to talk about how they got there. And I think sometimes they do not get bored, but maybe get a little bit tired of talking about their books over and over again. And so finding those kinds of things they can talk about that remind them of the things that they're passionate about, like the craft, like how we got there. And a lot of times you'll get the great stories about I'd written 70,000 words and then went back and read it and I had to scrap 30,000 of them, which, in my soul makes me want to clench up. And for other authors, it would too. But to an author who has just experienced that or is afraid they might be experiencing that, to hear that this person went through that, or they had a bad experience with a designer, or a bad experience with an editor, to hear those kinds of experiences and know that you can survive and get to the other side of it is hugely helpful for folks who did just buy the pair of shoes and are just trying it out.
Yeah. I had one author on, and she wrote 3 chapters and then took a 10-year break between chapter 3 and chapter 4. She was a completely different human being 10 years later, but she never really talked about that about her book. So from a reader's perspective, not knowing there's a 10-year gap between those 2 chapters, she sounds different as an author. She's totally like life has happened, right? And I want people to buy the book just so you can flip the page from chapter 3 to chapter 4. Just do that. There's 10 years. Keep doing that. 10 years, right? And just go, wow. And from her perspective, when we were done, she's like, I never really thought to lean into that story about that 10-year gap. I'm like, that's amazing. Like from a reader's perspective, you should really talk about that. So it was really interesting to kind of have that little moment with her and see her kind of go, hang on, that is pretty important, isn't it? Well, yeah.
I love those moments. I love those moments where you ask a question that they've not been asked before or they haven't thought about. And then you can kind of see the wheel spin for a minute and then off they go telling these great stories or these incredible insights because it's fresh, right? It's new. It's something they haven't thought about and just brings a lot more energy to that whole conversation.
When you get that response where they do a little chuckle and they kind of go, I've never talked about this before.
Yeah.
I don't know why I've never talked about this. What a question. Okay, well, here, I'm gonna tell you, you're gonna be the first, Dave, to hear this. Okay, this is the reason why this happened, and they go down this path, and I just shut up. Because I want to hear it all. I don't want to redirect them. I want them to, because the moment they do that, to me, that's an indicator that they're going to want to talk about this to their community. I was on Jay's podcast. He asked me this question. I've never been asked before.
Right.
You got to go hear this episode with Jay. I was so glad to be his guest, right? That's the moment I'm looking for, but I'm not coming with intent that every episode is going to hit that. Right. It's just naturally going to happen in the conversation. And one of the things I get at the end of my show for Living Next Chapter, they're like, how did you, like my book hasn't even come out. It comes out in like 3 months. Did my PR agency give you an advance copy? Like, how did you know to ask the question from chapter 4? Like, I've never talked about that before. I'm like, well, I'm just curious about you and the story. I've never seen the book. They're like, wow. Show me your questions. And I hold up a blank piece of paper. And they're like, I don't know the next question. I really don't know what I'm going to ask you next. I'm just here to serve you. And I love that response where they're just like, this is not like a normal podcast. Right. It's so prescripted and it feels predictable. And it's interesting if have an audience members reach out to me and say, the moment I felt like I had a question for Jay, you asked Jay the question, how did you know how to do that? Yeah. And I'm like, I recorded this episode 2 months ago. And it's released 2 months later. I have no idea. I wanted to spend time with Jay, so.
And that's it. I think it's finding ways to make those conversations organic. And I'd be interested. I have had conversations where the guest was not into it.
Right.
For whatever reason, it just wasn't, we weren't clicking. They were wildly disinterested. I had a guy sitting in the middle of his living room, holding a microphone kind of just up, leaning back. He'd move the microphone all over the place. He just wasn't, I don't know if he's having a bad day or what. And that just feels so different because you can't have an organic conversation. You really are it's just question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. But the moments where you get somebody on, and most of the time I don't know these folks very well or at all before they come on, but when you feel like you've just been talking to somebody that you would love to just sit down and have coffee with or talk with for 45 minutes, and it is conversation, it's back and forth, and it's questions that I ask questions that surprise me, where I'll be like, oh, I where'd that come from? Why did I think about that? But it's, based on something that they said along the way. Those are the ones that are really fun. And I think audiences also pick up on that there's energy there that they can enjoy, that they feel like they're the third person sitting at that table while we're talking.
Have you had any guests grab the mic and run away on your show, and you're now like, I don't have control anymore. I've lost it all. They're gone on this 45-minute story.
Yes.
Okay. What do you do?
Well, I try to, when they come up for air, because everybody breathes, although some not as often as we wish they would. I will kind of interrupt, because I edit, so I know that this is kind of going to go away, and I won't interrupt and say, please stop talking about that, because then that blows the whole thing up. But I will try to interject and ask another question or ask something that shoots off of where they're going with this story, just to bring them back to where we're headed. And to be completely honest, there have been times where I realized I can't stop this train. So I'll just sit back knowing that I'm going to edit 80% of what they're talking about. It's going away because it's not terribly interesting. It's not really on topic, or it's something they've already said. And just, sometimes my best friend is GarageBand, that I can just make that go away and not have to think about it. And most people who come on shows don't really remember everything that they say. Right. So even if they go back and listen, they're like, I told this great 5-minute story about getting on a train once, and it's not there. They don't know. So I'm not great at that, because I don't like to interrupt, but I also know that, for the sake of the people listening, I can't just let them go on and on and on. What do you do when that happens?
I like a yes/no question.
Okay.
Because there's no options. There's one or the other. And putting that in there is a moment, like a little diversion. It's a pattern disrupt, and they have to answer a simple yes or no question. And in that, they pause to think, now I have the mic, and now I can go back to leading again. I've used that I have one guest. I had to use it multiple times, because they're just a super talkative person. They were so kind and gentle, but really chatty. And again, because I do my pre-interviews, we already had a connection with them, and we've already talked for 20 minutes ahead of the interview. So they felt like they knew me like their best friend, which is exactly what I want. But that opened the door for them just to go completely all over the place. We weren't talking about anything to do with their book. So a little yes or no question, do you like to read often? Yes. Okay. What books do you like to, now I have guitar. What books do you like to read? Who's your favorite author? Who are you reading right now? Right. Great little things like that. Just makes them kind of pause for a second, and you just grab the mic. So
that's a great tip.
It works. For me, it works. But yeah, it's scary when they grab the mic and run away, because you don't know where you're going. And if I'm starting to tune out as a host, my audience is gone. They're gone. So yeah, so keep that in mind. What about my biggest struggle for living the next chapter? 3 years, 580 episodes. Wow, 580 people. Like, how do you keep track of 580 people? How do you keep the relationship going? How do you keep in touch with these people? How do you stay in their world and not be forgotten? I have a few things I'm playing with. I'm interested to hear how you address long-term relationships after the podcast. I know you do have your playlist, which I think is brilliant. I love that idea, where you're grouping your episodes together. What else are you doing to stay in the world of your guest post-podcast?
Some of it is just being in the literary world around Oklahoma City. And I think I have the advantage there because all of mine are geographically mostly in one place. So it makes it easier if I'll show up at somebody's book signing just to say hi again. Or we have an event in Oklahoma City called Lit Fest, where it's a free event that the Metropolitan Library System puts on for authors and readers. And I make sure that I'm always there, always doing panels. But when I'm not doing those things, I'm showing up at other people's stuff or catching me in the hallway and just reintroducing myself, making sure they remember who I am, keeping those relationships going. The other thing that I do, and this will be much harder for you given the number you're talking about, I'm connected to all of them on social media somewhere, somehow. And if they have something new coming out, I make sure I am cheerleading for that, even if I never read it or know anything about it, because I know them. And it's this funny thing that in a 45-minute or an hour-long conversation, I walk away from most of these conversations feeling like these people are my friends now. And I don't know if they feel that way about me, whatever, but I want to cheer for them. I want to tell the world not just about the one conversation that we had, but about all of these other great things that they're doing. And what that leads to then is opportunities for them to come back and say, hey, I've got a new book coming out. Could I come back on the show, or can we do this? I had a chance, just this fantastic author that I got to talk to who lives on the East Coast came to do a release for her paperback edition in Oklahoma City. And the bookstore invited me to be her conversation partner, which was awesome to kind of get to rebuild and expand on that relationship. So I think it's just being as intentional as I can, keeping an eye on what they're doing, being a cheerleader for them. And there are other things that happen through the podcast that just give opportunity to continue those conversations. So if an author has a new book coming out, I can say, go check out the latest from XYZ. And oh, by the way, I got to talk with her a year ago. Here's that conversation too. So it also gives a chance to bring back up those past episodes.
Good. One of the things I'm playing with right now that I haven't heard anybody in podcasting talk about. So I don't know if I'm like breaking the rules here, because there's so many rules, right? Anyways, so what I'm doing is I go back in my catalog to like episode 10. Now, the chances of somebody who's new to my podcast today, with 580 episodes, going back to episode 10, I'm pretty unlikely that's going to happen for everyone. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing episode 10. I pull the original publishing date for episode 10. I put it in the show notes for the episode. So I have a record of when this episode went live originally. And then I go into my hosting site and I change the date of that episode to a more recent date so that it groups it up with all the more recent episodes, moving it to the top of the list. But I always do it like a day or two previous to my current date. So it doesn't show up as a new episode. It shows up as a past episode, but grouped together. So you'll see 580, 579, episode 10, 578. It's like, why is 10 here? And what has been happening is I'm getting responses from readers and listeners that are like, oh my gosh, didn't even know about this episode. And I'm getting feedback from an episode that has been long forgotten from my current library, simply by changing the date and moving it up into wherever all the other new ones are. Because like for me, I'm a Spotify user for my listening app because I like music and podcasts, like back and forth. When I sort my podcast by date, it groups all my more recent ones at the top, right, for the newest. And then here's this episode 10 that doesn't look like it belongs in with a bunch of my 580s and 570s. It's all grouped together with these more recent episodes. For there's a likelihood they're going to hit play on it, maybe, right?
It also helps when you get a new subscriber, because some of the podcast apps that people subscribe on only give like the most recent 10 shows.
Right.
So you'll kind of get an automatic access to those. So it does, if nothing else, remind the listener there's 500 episodes of this thing. It's not just the few that you're going to get here, because here are some older ones that, and so it brings new life to those conversations.
So in doing that, one of the episodes had like a very small amount of downloads, doubled in a week the amount of listens for that particular episode from my archive 2-3 years ago, just by simply moving up. And then once it's been up there for a little while, I just put it back to the original date, because I put the date in the show notes, so I know exactly where it goes back in the order. And then I just grab another one, slide it up to the top. So it's just a way to kind of play with my old episodes, keep them alive, because they're great conversations, great people. Yeah. So anyways, that's another way that I'm kind of playing with it. Again, I don't hear anybody talking about this. Nobody's come to take my podcast away yet, so I think it's okay.
I think I think we'll allow it. Whoever the podcast ruling authority is, they seem to be okay with it. You see shows do that when they go on hiatus, or we're going to take a break for a couple of weeks. Here's a show from the archives you can check out. But to do it intentionally in the midst of everything else that's going on, that might be evil genius right there, David. I'm not sure.
There you go. One last question, Jay, before we let you go. What do you do as far as the assets for your audience, for your guest, around the episode, like artwork, say like Instagram, YouTube, or whatever you do? How do you communicate back to your guest? Your episode's live. here's the assets, here's the links, here's all this stuff. What do you do as part of your process as a kind of a final wrap up to your guests to kind of finalize the whole thing?
It's a simple email. I create, so I have my logo and it is what it is. I don't change logos for every episode because that's just too much work. So it's not unique cover art for every episode, but I do create an image in Canva for Facebook, for Instagram, for Twitter, for wherever else it goes. And so I will send the author or the guest, whoever they are, author, bookseller, whatever, I will send them the art that I've created. So that piece with, and it usually has their picture, their book, my logo, and then just their name and some things like that. It's pretty basic, but it's personalized to them and to that show. I do send them a copy of just my logo in case they want to use that instead of the art that I've created. And then I'll send them a couple of links. I'll send them a direct link to my show on Buzzsprout, which is my hosting platform, and then a link to the show on my website. I don't direct to Apple or Spotify or whatever because not everybody listens that way. But I own my website. And so if folks go there and I see a huge amount of traffic that either goes through Buzzsprout, my host, or comes to the website and listens there. And then in that email, I also remind them, first of all, thanks for being on the show. It sure was fun to talk with you. The show's going to go live at midnight. And we'll remind them original posts by the guest will generate more heat from your audience than if you retweet or repost what I put out there. Whatever you want to do is great. And I try to be real, relaxed and groovy about it. But what I'm saying is take 10 minutes, create a post, put it out there, because that's going to give your audience the idea that what you've done is new and unique to you and not just this thing that you're throwing out that somebody else has done.
Excellent. Great suggestions. I like that. I do a similar process. My problem is because there's a delay between the recording day and the release day. I leverage YouTube as an advanced listen, and I create a still image video on YouTube. I know everybody hates that. And I'm like, well, it works. And what happens is I put it up there in advance, and then my guest has access to it within a few days of recording time. And if they want to share it, it's a live link into the future. Even when the podcast comes out in the future, they still have access to it. So I don't want to delay them for 2 months, 3 months to get their episode because they're going to forget about me in that period of time. And they just had a great interview. They just had a great conversation. So capitalize on their excitement and give them something right away. That's kind of how I do it. And I just tell my audience, if you want to hear what I'm doing live in the moment, go to YouTube and you can hear what I recorded yesterday. So yesterday, I did two interviews yesterday. They're online right now. Boom. So
I don't think that's a bad thing. You say, well, people don't like those still image studios. There's a ton of people that are listening to stuff while they're working, while they're doing whatever, that they're not watching it anyway. So it doesn't matter if you have dancing monkeys because they're listening to the audio. They're not paying any attention to what's going on. So make it simple, but absolutely get it out there where people can see it. I love that idea of, I'm going to make sure that there's something out in the world quickly so that the guest doesn't forget that they were on the show.
Yeah. And remember that YouTube Music is on the backbone of YouTube, and YouTube Music is an audio player.
Right.
So if you want to be on YouTube Music, you got to supply an audio version of your podcast to YouTube to be on YouTube Music. So just keep that in mind. It's not actually a bad thing to have that still image video podcast. So anyway.
I think it's great.
Again, we're breaking all the rules, Jay. We're breaking all the rules here. I love it.
You do.
Thank you for being so smooth and groovy, as you just said earlier, on the show. Jay, I love having you here. Again, let's shout out your show again as we head out the door. And I just love you have time for me. I really appreciate it.
No, this has been so fun, Dave. I appreciate all of the conversations, but I love talking about podcasting. Again, the stuff that we're passionate about, it's easy to keep talking. The show's called the Okie Bookcast, OKIE Bookcast. You can find it at okiebookcast.com. If you are interested in any kind of reading, everything from nonfiction to horror to children's books to you name it, I've had the privilege of talking with folks about those kinds of books. So come check it out. And you can find me everywhere at Okie Bookcast on social media, Twitter or X, whatever we call it these days, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all kinds of places, just talking about books. And I love to do it. So come find me, say hi, tell me about your favorite book. I'll tell you about mine, and we will start a conversation that way.
I need one loving nudge from you in a smooth and groovy way. I need you to encourage that podcaster that's caught in an information loop where they're researching, but not acting. They've never hit the microphone. They've never hit record. They've gone to gurus. They've bought courses. They've been to conferences. They've bought books. They listen to podcasts about podcasting, of which this is one. They're just caught in this, I want to know everything about podcasting before I start, but I'm afraid to start. Jay, in loving, as gentle and smooth and groovy as you can be, please talk to this person who's trapped in information overload without action. What's your suggestion?
It is simple and yet terrifying, because I did the same thing. Now, I didn't do it for months on end. I spent 6 weeks trying to talk myself out of doing a podcast before I started doing a podcast, because there was so much I didn't know. What I would tell that person who is trapped in this loop, and I've talked with them, you've talked with them, is just give it a shot. What I would encourage them to do is sit down with whatever equipment you have, even if that means you've got a pair of AirPods that it can also serve as your microphone, and record something that you are passionate or you are excited about, and then listen to it and see if it was fun to do. Don't publish it. Don't worry about anybody ever hearing it. Just try it. Just do it. Because what I found, Dave, I bet was what you found, lots of folks who do what we do, the process of creating becomes so fun, so quick, that you forget about all the rules, as clearly you and I are doing, and just start making your thing. And I think, to me, that's the most important deal. Make your thing. Don't make what the gurus are going to tell you is going to make a lot of money, because I hate to be the one to tell you, it's probably not going to make a lot of money. It may not get 50,000 people listening to every episode, but if it is a thing that you are joyous about, if it's a thing that you love to do, then once you start hearing those recordings, even if nobody else but you hears it, you're going to be hooked. And then it's going to be easier to take the next step and put that out on a platform and put that out for the world. I
like it. Theodore Roosevelt, do what you can with what you have, where you are.
There you go.
That's
you need. Just start. Just start. That's what I did.
Excellent. Jay, thank you so much for doing this. Everyone go check out the podcast. Leave a great rating, review, do all the stuff, follow, share. And if you live in Jay's part of the world, come on. Keep your eyes open. You're going to find him somewhere. Grab a bookmark at your local bookstore. Send him a photo. Do something. Let Jay know you're listening to the show. Jay, thank you so much.
Dave, thanks. It's been great.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast all the way through to the end. I love having these great guest co-hosts on the show to share their podcast with you. You have some homework to do. And what I'm asking of you is to go check out our featured guest co-host today. Go over and listen to their podcast. The links are always in the show notes. And I'd love for you to go and give them your love and support. And I think if we can all do that for each other, podcasting will be a lot more fun for all of us. So it's time to do what you've asked others to do for you. It's time to do for this guest co-host. Links in the show notes. Go over and check out their show and leave them a review. Do the follow. Go listen to their episodes in full, the entirety of an episode, which again shows to the apps that it's a good podcast, because you're going there and you're staying to the end. It's probably one of the best ways you can help a podcaster grow their audience and be shown to more people is by simply going and listening wherever you listen to the very end, like you're doing right now here. This is the perfect way to signal to wherever you're listening on, this is a podcast worth promoting. And all of the apps want you to stay on as long as possible. So go over and listen to our guest co-host episode and leave them some feedback. If they have a buy me a coffee, send them a coffee. If they have a speak pipe, send them a voice message. If they have an email, send them an email. If they're on Instagram, send them a direct message. Do something to support our guest co-hosts. They've given up their time to be here with you, to be here with me. And we can give that back to them with time and attention, our love, our support. Thank you for doing all that for me as well. Here on the How to Podcast series, we'll talk to you soon for our next episode.